When we think of great leaders, we often think of great communicators. People that can get in front of their team at just the right moment and inspire them with powerful words. Perhaps like me, you want to be a more compelling speaker. Maybe you want a playbook for how to handle those nerves when you have to stand and give a presentation. Well, my guest today is a speaking expert. He's done 5 TED Talks with over 150 million views, including the number 6 TED Talk of all time. We're going to get real practical today with Julian Treasure. Let's jump in. Welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast, a place to be refreshed, renewed, and encouraged as you lead yourself, your family, and your team. I'm Cal, and I'm so grateful that you're joining me today. I'm really excited to welcome Julian Treasure on the show. Please make sure you subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're tuning in from. I'm really grateful to see more and more of you over on YouTube. If you're a regular listener on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and you've not checked out my YouTube channel, come over to the channel, drop me a comment, subscribe. It's really fun to be able to see and connect with people on that platform. Julian's TED Talk, How to Speak So That People Want to Listen, is the 6th most viewed TED Talk of all time. He obviously knows what he's talking about. On this episode, you'll hear how he prepares for a TED Talk. We'll talk about the importance of listening, and we'll talk about what to do when those nerves start to pop up when you're about to give a big talk or a presentation. Maybe that's just me, but I would love to have a playbook for how to handle that, and we talk about that. I really think this is going to add a lot of value to you today, and if it does, please share it with a friend. So without any further ado, please enjoy this conversation with the great Julian Treasure. All right, well, welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast, Julian. I'm so excited to have you here.
Well, thank you for asking me. I'm thrilled to be here too.
As I was mentioning off camera, I'm fascinated by communication and speaking, and you have a lot of leaders who also, I'm sure, are interested in becoming better communicators. A lot of the questions I'm going to ask you today are selfish because I really want to be an effective speaker and communicator. I think I'm okay, but I want to be really good. And it's difficult, I've noticed, to try to incrementally get better. You are the person to talk to. You've done 5 TED Talks with over 150 million views. I believe you have the number 6 TED Talk of all time. Tell us a little bit about how you became such an effective communicator.
Well, you've passed the first doorway and you're into the room, and that doorway is about being conscious that these things are skills. The vast majority of people are on the other side of that. They think speaking and listening are capabilities, natural capabilities, which is why I think probably we don't teach them in school, which is the most enormous tragedy. So becoming conscious that, hey, here's a skill that I can practice, a skill that I can master. That's the first and most important step for both of these two things. So congratulations on taking that huge step, which is one that, the vast majority of people haven't taken yet. I took it a long time ago, I guess, because I'm a musician, and I think musicians listen to the world in a slightly different way to non-musicians. If you're playing in a band or in an orchestra, you've got to have a kind of multi-track, very attentive listening. You've got to be listening to all the other instruments all the time in a very attentive way. Otherwise, you're not going to play very well. And that's a kind of listening which I kept with me all the way through when I wasn't playing as well, as I think probably many musicians do, noticing that the world doesn't sound very good. There's an awful lot of noise around, and it's not healthy for us. So I had a long career in marketing. I ended up launching a company, becoming an entrepreneur, and building a company in the UK, which produced custom magazines, contract magazines for some big brands. And I sold that in 2002. And I was able then to try and bring the two halves of me together because I enjoyed marketing. And I had thought, why is it these organizations make so much noise and don't listen to what's going on around them and haven't thought about how their brand sounds? So that was the question the sound agency was set up to ask, was how does your brand sound? And it occurred to me as we went on in that journey, the reason for this is that the people in the organizations are not listening. And that really made me focus even more on my own communication skills. I guess like many entrepreneurs, and people who build industries, which I helped to do in the UK, I had done a lot of public speaking, teams, pitching, selling, big events and things like that. And I realized that it was important for me also to develop that skill and not rely simply on a bit of experience or native cunning or, whatever I was born with. But, these skills are so important that it behooves all of us to take them seriously and develop them. So I did coaching, I went to educational things. I practiced a great deal. So anything I've got now, it's not an accident. That's the important thing to realize, that, these things don't just happen. It's very rare that somebody is blessed to the point where they're a brilliant speaker or a brilliant listener without doing any work at all. It's like, anybody who's a genius at sport. You can have great natural talent, but when you look behind the scenes, you'll find all those people have got a coach. They take it very seriously. Yeah. They practice, always looking for the final 1%, because it's that 1% that makes the difference between winning and losing. The people who come 20th are very, very good too. And it's normally a very fine margin. So it's the same thing with all these skills. If you want to have, a dramatic change in your outcomes in life, in your happiness, effectiveness, and well-being, then take these skills seriously, because they affect those three things. How well you speak and how well you listen have dramatic outcomes on your happiness, effectiveness, and well-being.
Well, that's encouraging, I think, for all of us, is that it's not something you either have or you don't have, it sounds like. It sounds like something that certainly, I imagine there's some level of gifting, or, hey, you have maybe the raw material to do this very well. Maybe some are more suited than others, but that it's something you can develop. And that's, at least for me, that's encouraging. I'm glad to know that if I really want to get better at this, I can get better at this. And I think it's interesting, just observing your work, that there's a lot of discussion between speaking and listening. Because I can imagine when people think, I want to be a great communicator, I want to learn how to get in front of an audience like Julian Treasure and captivate the audience. It's almost counterintuitive to think that having a really good listening ear might be part of that process for becoming a better speaker. Tell us why listening is something that you focus on in helping people communicate better.
I have at the center of my work a concept that speaking and listening are in a circular relationship. It's not a straight line. It's not I speak, you listen, that's it. Because the way you listen affects the way I speak. The way I speak affects the way you listen. The way I speak affects the way you speak. The way I listen affects the way you listen as well. So there's this organic circular relationship happening all the time. That's a big part of it. And understanding that is it points you in the direction of being sensitive to listening anyway, if you want to be a great speaker. And incidentally, many people, it seems to me, are much keener to be heard than they are to listen. And that's a failing. To give you evidence of that, my TED Talk on speaking has been seen by at least 5 times as many people as my TED Talk on listening. And the work on organizational listening, there's been quite a lot of research on that. There's a big piece called the Organizational Listening Project. Interestingly, they found that organizations were spending roughly 5 times as much time, money, resource, attention on outbound communication as they were on inbound communication. You say corporate communication, you immediately think of PR, advertising, social media. Outbound. It's speaking. So we're much keener to be heard than we are to listen generally, and that is a problem. So I said that part of the reason that's a problem is because of this circular relationship, and if you're sensitive to it, then you can understand you're in an organic and dynamic relationship. As you're speaking, somebody's listening, and those two things are affecting one another. Well, the other really significant part of this is that everybody's listening is unique. And that's a fundamental realization that very few people have. You know, one of the most common misconceptions in communication is the idea that everybody listens like I do. They don't.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because we all listen through a set of filters, and those filters are set from birth onwards. We all have traveled a slightly different road to this conversation today. You, me, and everybody listening to this, we have different listening filters. It's about the culture you're born into, perhaps. Might be family culture, tribal, local, city, national, whatever it is. It could be the language you learn to speak. It could be the values, attitudes, and beliefs that you accrete along the way. Some you pick up from parents, role models, friends, teachers, whoever. Others you cast aside. You say, that's not for me. Well, you, Cal, have made different decisions from me along the way. They may not be radically different, but they won't be the same. And then in any given situation, we might have expectations or intentions for what's going to happen, which color our listening. We might have assumptions about what's going on in other people's heads, something that very, very much colors our listening. We might have emotions going on.
Yeah.
And emotions have a dramatic effect on our listening. It's much harder to listen well if you're upset or you've really got any strong emotion going on. And by the same token, if you want to calm somebody down who's upset, the best way to do that is listen to them. So all those listening filters effectively create our reality, because listening is an activity. It's a skill, an activity, and it's not just a capability. It's not a passive thing. Hearing, of course, is different. You hear everything around you, depending on whether you've got damaged hearing or not. You hear everything. You don't select what you hear. It's just goes in your ears and you hear it. But for listening, you do select. You select certain things to pay attention to, and then you make them mean something. So that's why my definition of listening is making meaning from sound. And that's all done through those filters. So what that means, if you accept that everybody's listening is unique as their fingerprints, is that every conversation is somebody speaking into a listening that's unique. And therefore, it's a very powerful question to start asking yourself, what's the listening I'm speaking into? What's the listening I'm speaking into? Whether it's one person, 10 people, or 1,000 people, there's a unique listening at that moment from that person or that group. And if you start asking the question and becoming sensitive to it, well, that is how you can speak more powerfully and hit the bullseye instead of missing the target altogether. I've seen many speakers walk on stage and be entirely inappropriate for the audience because they didn't ask that question. They didn't think about the listening. And it changes through time as well as from person to person or audience to audience. You know, I've given 5 TED Talks, so often if I've got a speaking engagement, they say, oh, put him on after lunch. He's a TED speaker. He can deal with it. Because after lunch is known as the graveyard slot. It's when everybody's a bit tired, right, or the blood's got to the gut.
Everybody's napping, yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, he can deal with that. So I'm used to that one. And that's a very different listening from 10 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the afternoon when everybody wants to go home. So listening changes through time and because of circumstances. You know, the speaker before me, if I go on after somebody else, might have been absolutely brilliant and had them rolling in the aisles. That's not my style. I'm not a comedian. So I have to deal with that, and I have to shift, you know, the state of people into what I'm doing, being conscious of where they are right now. You know, every time you give a talk, you're taking people on a journey from A to B. And where is A? That's the question to ask. Because if you're starting from somewhere else and they're over there, you've got no chance.
That's really helpful. I think the best leaders that I've seen are often the best listeners. And there's something special when you talk to someone. Let's say you go to a party and you happen to be talking to someone who's a really good listener, who asks good questions, who you can just tell is genuinely curious in you and hearing your story. It makes that entire experience so much more enjoyable. And I noticed that. I remember my wife and I we'll often when we come back from a party or an outing, we'll say, who did you talk to? How was it? And interestingly enough, I've just noticed a pattern that when I'm with someone who's a good listener, it's so much more enjoyable. And I try to be a good listener. But I don't know that I am always a good listener. What do you think are some of the common traits or commonalities, I guess, between people who are really good listeners? What do they do differently?
I think there are 4 C's of effective listening. The first C is consciousness that you're doing something, consciousness that you're listening. It's work. It's effort. Listening is not passive. It's not something that just happens. So anybody who is a good listener is conscious that they're doing something. And the second C is a corollary of that, really. It's commitment. Scott Peck said you cannot truly listen to anyone and do anything else at the same time. And I think that's absolutely true. But now ask yourself, in the modern world, how often do we do that? Dear listeners, hello, when's the last time you gave somebody 100% of your undivided attention? Put down that device in your hand, anything else that you're doing, turn to the person, look at them, listen to them. Try it after this. You might get the response, what are you doing? Because people aren't very used to it.
It's so weird. Yeah. What do you?
We spend a huge amount of our time partially listening to people. You could call it faux listening, but that's fine if you're conscious that you're partially listening. And that's where the first C is so important again. We can't completely listen to everybody all the time. That's just not practical or possible in the modern world. We do need to know what we're doing, though. So if I'm doing something and somebody's talking to me, I'm partially listening and I'm comfortable with that if it's relatively light communication. But if they're pouring their heart out to me about something that happened that they're really upset about, now, hold on, it's time to put everything down, turn to them, say, hold on, let's sit down and talk about this. So being conscious and being committed, those are 2 very important C's. The third C is compassion. Seeking to understand the other person. That's my definition of compassion, if you like. Really trying to understand what's going on for them and what their feelings are. That is critical. We spend so much of our time making people wrong, which is because we have a kind of global addiction now to being right. And the easiest way to be right is to make somebody else wrong. There's a great quote from the American therapist and author Harville Hendrix. He said, you can either be right or be in a relationship. And I think there's a lot of truth in that.
That's good.
And he said, you can't curl up with being right at the end of the day. So unfortunately, that's something that's been dramatically accelerated by social media. When you think of the pylons and the trolling that goes on out there, it's all about being right. And that makes you feel elevated. If somebody else is wrong, I'm better. I'm better because I'm right. And unfortunately, we've lost sight of the difference between opinions and facts in this race to be right. So there's a huge amount of table thumping and shouting, and, politics is going to a very dangerous place, in my opinion, where there's very little listening, and it's all about making other people wrong. And so compassion, I think, is an essential element of good listening, and it's an endangered species at the moment. And the fourth C, curiosity. Curiosity. Thinking of everybody you meet perhaps as an opportunity to learn. It may be that you're going to learn how not to do something, or, how to avoid disaster, or whatever it might be. quite often it is that. But you may also learn how to do something or how to improve or an area where you can grow. So judging books by covers, making assumptions about people, dismissing them before they've even opened their mouths, or particularly in a long-term relationship, getting to that place where, oh, I know what you're going to say. Oh, you're saying that thing again, where it's a little bit tired. We can really remove those things by becoming curious and perhaps allowing somebody we've been with for a long time to surprise us again, go back to the beginning of where it was, listen to them as if for the first time. And it can rekindle perhaps some of those feelings that can get jaded over time, especially if we start thinking we know what they're thinking. And you never know what another human being is thinking. So being curious is the fourth C. So there you are.
That is a great construct, Julian. It's convicting. I'll throw another C in there. It's convicting for me. I think about my moments as a leader where someone walks into my office, I'm in the middle of typing an email, and it's so hard for me in that moment sometimes, and I think I've gotten a little bit better about this over time because I am conscious of the fact that this is important, is just stepping away from the device that I'm currently on, looking at that person, and then listening and being curious and being compassionate. And obviously that's a trait that the best leaders, I think, really need to get better at. And I think, to your point, it's easy to want to be right, or it's easy to assume that what that person has to say is not something you need to hear, that you already know what they're going to say, or you already know everything that needs to be known about that particular issue. But I just think, I can't remember, I believe it's Andy Stanley has a great quote where he says, a leader who doesn't listen will be surrounded by people with nothing to say. And that's certainly not what we want as leaders. We do not want to have an organization that doesn't feel like, why bother? He never listens or she never listens. So I hope that for the leaders listening, that they'll take that to heart like I am. Julian, I want to ask you about your preparation for giving a big talk. Obviously, you've done this a lot. You don't get, if you watch your TED Talk that got, I believe, 6 or 40 million views, I think, as of this morning. It's about 9 minutes, I believe. I don't think I heard any ums. There were no speech tics. It is, like you said, you took us on a journey, which was beautiful. Like, you knew where you were going. It was kind of like having a guide take you on this beautiful path, and you felt totally like you could trust this person. But what did it look like for you to prepare for that? What's your process for, because you mentioned also that one of the keys to effective communication is thinking about how the audience is listening. So I wonder, how do you go about studying the audience? How do you think about the audience? And then how do you prepare your own speaking? How do you go through the process of putting together a talk, maybe rehearsing it? I don't know if, I imagine you maybe have some kind of process for arriving at what is just such a polished speech. It makes it really easy to listen to. I'll say that. When I watch your TED Talk, it's like listening to a beautiful song. It has nice rhythm to it. It has nice pace. I don't get bored. It's as soon as you kind of flow from one topic, you flow easily into the next. There's not a lot of distractions that make me want to go do something. So I'm just curious, walk us through what your process is like to prepare for a big talk like that.
First of all, thank you for the kind words, Cal. It really means a lot to me, and it's lovely to hear. Actually, thinking about speaking into a listening, so the first question is, what's the listening I'm going to be speaking into? Well, by that time, I'd given 4 TED Talks before, so I knew the feeling of the TED audience. And to be honest, the TED audience, it may be very daunting. You look up, oh, there's Jeff Bezos. Oh, there's Bill Gates. It's not your average audience. However, it is a very sympathetic and positive audience. I've seen people at TED do everybody's number one fear, which is dry up and forget what they're doing in the middle of a talk. And what happens? almost immediately people start applauding at TED to say,
that's cool.
Don't worry, we're with you. It's okay. So it's a very sympathetic audience. So it's not like doing an open mic, so, a comedy club or something where you're terrified of being hooked off or heckled to pieces.
They're throwing tomatoes at you. Yeah.
Yeah, not like that. So I think, if you get to speak at TED, then you have a very positive listening that you're speaking into in the first place. So that's the first thing. I have a process that I train people on, which I summarize in 3 initials, PPD. It's a bit like an Olympic athlete would train for an event. So the first P is practice, practicing the skill, the simple skill of public speaking, which involves doing the thing over and over again. Just as you would with riding a bike or driving a car, you have to go through the stages of unconscious incompetence and then conscious incompetence and then conscious competence and then unconscious competence. So there's 4 stages where you get to finally the stage where you feel very comfortable with the whole thing and you can focus on other things than the actual doing, the nuts and bolts. That comes through practice. And so anybody who needs to do this, and by the way, I have given many talks to audiences of CEOs or senior managers, and I say to them, how many of you have to use your voice in important ways in your work? Everybody puts their hand up. They have to speak in public, they lead teams, media, presentations, selling, whatever it may be. Okay, how many of you have had formal vocal tuition? About 2 put their hand up. I just go, what? If your voice is important to you guys, we don't get taught this in school, which is a tragedy. But if your voice is important to you, then get trained, practice. So there are lots of ways you can practice. You could form a buddy group with some other people and get together every couple of weeks around somebody's house and give talks and critique each other. You could join an organization like Toastmasters International, who have chapters, almost everywhere in the world. And that's what they do. They let you have the opportunity to speak in a safe environment in front of people, get critiqued, get coached, and get better. So there are ways you can do this. You can coach yourself now. It's so easy with a mobile phone. Just film yourself doing the talking about anything. Try a whole variety of topics, long ones, short ones, funny ones, interesting ones, whatever it might be. And the moment you start filming yourself, I can guarantee you'll be going, oh my goodness, I didn't know I did that. So that's a very good way you can become your own coach, or hire a coach, voice coach, drama coach, presentation coach, singing coach, whatever it might be. Somebody who can work with you on your posture, on your delivery, on your vocal styling, on projection, diaphragm control, breathing, whatever it might be. Get a coach. If it's a serious thing for you, get a coach and work on it. So practice is the first P, becoming good at speaking. Whenever it is, stand up in a group and get going, or give an after dinner speech, or give a wedding speech, or whatever it might be that you have to do in life. Just be good at it because it helps. The second P is prepare. So again, just like an Olympic athlete, they practice the skill, and then there's an event coming up and they prepare for it. It might be a game where you have to think about the opposition, the tactics, whatever it is you're going to do. Or if you're like a skier, it's that slope. Where have you got to take care? Where can you go for it? That kind of thing. It's the same with a talk. What's the venue like? Check it out. Has it got everything you need? I use slides typically in my talks. So if I turn up somewhere having not prepared, what, you don't have a projector? What do you mean you don't have a projector? That would be a bit of a bummer for me. So checking the venue, making sure you understand everything's everything's going to be in place. Who are you going to be speaking to? What's the listening you're going to be speaking into? What is the journey you want to take the people on? All of those things are wrapped up in preparing for the individual event. And that's where rehearsing comes in. So yes, every one of those TED Talks that I've given, all the 5 and the 11 TEDx's as well, I've rehearsed. I've thought about these things, and then I've rehearsed the very first TED Talk, which was about the 4 effects of sound. My daughter, who was quite young at the time, knew it as well as I did because she saw it probably about 20 times, with her being the audience on a sofa in front of me having the slides on the TV behind me, and delivering it over and over again until I got to the point where I knew it. And I knew that I wasn't going to fall into the biggest fear we all have, which is forgetting where we are and looking like we've failed. So when you get to that stage where you know the thing, then you can go on stage and jazz with it and enjoy the experience. Now that's the icing on the cake. That's the special sauce. Because when you go onto a stage and you're happy to be there, you're excited, you enjoy the experience, you can connect with the audience in a way that if you're entirely focused on what you're going to say and how you're going to say it, that's much more mannerized and stiff and, rehearsed in a way that's formal as opposed to rehearsed to liberate you. So I always think of it as jazz, really. I don't read writing. I think reading writing is different from speaking. So I use slides which indicate to me the next thing I'm going to be talking about, but then I just extemporize. I make it all up, and I know it reasonably well by now. So that's the prepare bit, and we've moved into the D, which is deliver. So practice, prepare, deliver. An athlete would talk about execute, I think is the word they tend to use, but it's a little bit of a brutal word to me. So I talk about deliver. And also because deliver means giving something to somebody. And that's what you're doing. You're giving a gift to the audience, which is a really important way to think of it. I talk about the 4 foundations of speaking: honesty, authenticity, integrity, and love. And the love part is giving that gift, wishing people well, giving them the gift. It's not about me. It's not about me getting affirmation. It's not about me looking good. It's about the gift I can give to those people. And if you come on stage genuinely wishing people well and excited to give them this gift you're going to give them, that really works. Then you forge a great connection. As far as the ums are concerned, again, that's just practice, Cal. It is practice. You don't have to fill every second with noise. So there is a point at which you perhaps have to work at becoming comfortable with silence. I talked about that in that TED Talk. It's one of the elements in what I call the vocal toolbox. Many other aspects of voice are important. Silence is great. I won't demonstrate it now too much. I'll give you a warning. I'm going to demonstrate silence. This is not a breakdown. That's cool. There's nothing wrong with a few seconds of silence where everybody can take a breath and reflect. And if I'm standing on stage and doing that, I've demonstrated this. I can be silent for half a minute, even longer. And as long as I'm not looking uncomfortable, the audience are going, oh, it's nice to have a bit of a rest. What shall I have for lunch? It's all absolutely fine. It's only if you start going red and looking flustered and sweating that people realize there's a technical issue going on. And even then, they're probably on your side. So the ums and ers, not necessary. And it's a great discipline to work on being comfortable with gaps so that you can think without making a noise. I hope that answered your question.
No, that's great. That's really, really helpful. And I can imagine that same process could be implemented for even getting ready for a big meeting. If you're a leader and you've got a big presentation to a board, or you know that you've got your monthly meeting with your staff and you want to make sure that you present well and that you feel confident, that you feel rehearsed. In fact, one of my favorite leaders, he actually sets aside a lot of time to prepare for his meetings. I think a lot of us think that, I'll just, it's a meeting. So the point is just to, and there are meetings, of course, where the point is just to show up and just kind of collaborate. But there are also meetings that I think probably a lot of us have where it's really a critical moment where you can maximize that opportunity with your people, and being just a little bit more prepared with what you're going to say and feeling, like you said, Julian, very confident and ready to deliver and add value to your people can probably make a lot of difference. I also noticed, Julian, as you were talking, and also something you said earlier, it just appears to me that you're really not focusing very much on yourself in the moment of delivery. It seems like to me the preparation, and correct me if I'm wrong, Julian, because you're the expert, but it seems like what you're describing, there's that practice, there's the preparation, and that you are very much kind of making sure the mechanics are the way you want them to be. It sounds like you really start to develop a lot of confidence and excitement almost, because you talked about like now it's time to get excited and deliver and have fun almost. And I know that John Maxwell, he often talks about how one of the best communicators are really, really focused on their audience, and they're in the moment. They're not as focused on themselves. What are your thoughts on that? Is that a key to effective communication in the moment? Is where you're, because I've had plenty of times, Julian, where I probably wasn't as prepared as I could have been. I was a little bit more nervous than I probably should have been because I didn't do as many rehearsals as I would have liked. And so I find in those moments, I'm really just thinking about like, oh man, what are they thinking of me? Are they going to catch that I maybe messed up that word or that my transitions weren't as good? So I'm very focused on myself. And I can imagine when I'm doing that, just naturally, I'm not thinking about the people that are listening to me. So I'm so focused on and obviously speaking is, what is it? The number one fear, public speaking is people would rather be in the coffin than speaking at their funeral, as they say. So anyway, what are your thoughts on kind of being oriented towards the audience in the moment of delivery versus thinking about yourself?
Well, first of all, that urban myth about the number one fear, I tracked that down a few years ago, and it's actually not a true thing. Nobody's done that research. It's really an apocryphal story which has circulated and circulated on the internet to the point where everybody takes it as now true. It was like that ridiculous story that came out a few years ago that human beings now had the attention span of a goldfish, where somebody had incorrect.
Yeah, I've repeated that as well.
Yeah. Well, somebody had incorrectly written seconds instead of minutes in the summary of some research that was done, I think, for Microsoft years ago. And so that also is completely incorrect. We don't have the attention span of a goldfish, fortunately. But these things circulate.
Well, that's good news. That's good.
Yes. I think the answer to what you just asked me is quite a complex one, actually. First of all, yes, focus on the audience is essential, as in wishing them well and giving them the gift. And that's why you're there. So that's a kind of intention thing. And there are always three intentions when you speak to anyone. There's my intention for me. What do I want to get out of this? There's my intention for the audience. What do I want them to get out of this? And the third intention, I have to guess, what's their intention for them? What are they thinking they want to get out of this?
Oh.
That's quite an important one to guess. And that's that question, what's the listening I'm speaking into? I mean, why are they here? Why have these people come to this conference, meeting, whatever it may be? What are they intending to get out of it? And many, many meetings that I've been to over the years have suffered badly from misaligned intentions, where people have come to a meeting with different intentions and nobody vocalizes that, and everybody's talking at cross purposes, and it's very frustrating. So it's a great idea at the beginning of any meeting to corporately set an agenda. I mean, maybe you've got one. To reiterate, guys, the reason we're here is this. We're going to achieve that. Or, guys, let's all go around and talk about what we want to get out of this meeting, which will reveal any mismatches like that. So yes, intention-wise, I need to be with the audience. In terms of consciousness, though, I can't guess what's going on in their heads. I can ask what's the listening. I can try to be sensitive to it, but you never know what's in somebody else's head. Actually, it's not possible. So what I can do in terms of consciousness is to be radically conscious of myself, of what I'm doing, of how I'm performing it. I'm not talking about If my intention is to impress people, then I would start asking questions like, what are they thinking of me? And so forth. If my intention is to inspire them, educate them, move them from A to B, as I said, and we have to know where A is and we have to know where B is, then I can be certainly asking questions like, how am I doing on that journey? Have I got them with me? Are they with me? And that's an important part of reflection when you're speaking. So one of the reasons I love speaking actually in public is because it's probably the time I'm most conscious. If you've got 500 people staring at you, you better be conscious. So that's where unconscious things have to be done away with. They have to be, put away. Little gestures or verbal tics or physical tics that one might have in one's private life, favorite words, whatever it might be. You don't want a speaker to come on and be going, you know what I mean, you know what I mean, you know what I mean all the time, or or leaning on one foot and then leaning on the other foot, and then the audience by this time are going, is he going back? Oh yes, he's doing it again. So it's just distracting to have any of these things going on, and that's why consciousness is the key. And one of the reasons I love this whole conversation about communication is because it's really about consciousness, awareness, presence, and being more in the world and more related to other people. So yes, I agree that you focus on the audience in that way, being sensitive to them. It's for them. You're giving them a gift. But at the same time, you need to be conscious, very conscious in yourself of what you're doing.
Thank you. That's a lot more nuanced than the way I was thinking about it. So that's really helpful. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about is what we do with our nerves. I can imagine, or I can just think of my own experience where I've practiced a fair amount, but then it's game day. Then it's like the moment where, like for me, when I was a prosecutor, you can just feel the tension when the judge says, does the prosecution have a closing argument? And it's just like, oh, wow, that's me. Like I'm on now. Or I can imagine at the TED talk, you're probably some bright lights and like you said, 500 people, Jeff Bezos is right there. Like how do you coach people to deal with the tension or the nerves of the moment where you're walking into a meeting and everyone gathers around and everyone looks at you, and then you've prepared, of course, and I imagine that's part of it, but like in the moment, do you have any tips for how people can keep their nerves under control in that moment?
Definitely. And, nerves are something we all feel. So the first thing to get right is to welcome the feeling. It's there to help you perform at your peak. Nerves create adrenaline. Adrenaline is a hormone which makes you more alert, stronger, faster, all sorts of things. So it's your fight-flight hormone, apart from anything else. So it's there to give you peak performance. And the mistake many people make is to think, I shouldn't be nervous. You should be nervous. It's appropriate. It's completely the right way to be. So it can help enormously to welcome the nerves. And they do get less over time, obviously. I mean, I don't get, I'm not trembling and frightened. It's not negative nerves when I go on. I'm excited, stimulated, and really up for it when I go on stage and talk to people. So I still feel nervous, even though I've done it hundreds of times. So that's the first thing is one's relationship with nerves. Change that for the positive. Welcome them. They're your friend. Of course, if they have, an effect on you, like they make your voice go a little bit trembly like this and so forth, there is a big antidote to that, which is breath. Take a deep breath. Your voice is just breath. And I have a little acronym I train people on, which is about the moment you stand at the front of the room or stand up to speak in a meeting or walk onto the stage or whatever it might be. The acronym is BESS. And the B is breath, is breathe. So as you're getting up to give your summation in a court, big deep breath, and that will calm the voice instantly. It's a really good way of taking that and calming it down. So breathe. And the second letter of BESS is expand your awareness to take in everyone rather than one person. I've seen, many speakers deliver an entire talk to one person in the audience who after a while starts to feel pretty uncomfortable. So why is he looking at me the whole time? So try to see the whole room. You can gaze around, take in parts of the room, but always being conscious of the whole room all the time. And it gives you a kind of soft vision. And incidentally, if you're in kind of peripheral vision like that, it tends to smooth out your forehead. So instead of frowning, which you tend to do if you're looking at one person, your face smooths out and you look much more relaxed, and it's a happier relationship. The two S's. The first S is stance. So it's standing in a confident way. And there's a great visualization that I use for that, which is imagining there's a string attached to the top of your head and that everything is dangling from that string. And if that's a visualization that you can implement, then it automatically puts you in a kind of vertical, upright, shoulders back and down, but relaxed stance. So it's not stiff, you're dangling, so you can move, but it's also not skew with or, in some way distracting. And the second S, smile. Now that may not be appropriate in a criminal trial, of course. I can understand that.
Sure.
If you're walking on stage and you're connecting with an audience, it's great to walk on stage and give them a smile, because that says, I'm happy to be here. Yeah. I'm going to give you something good. You're going to enjoy this. And the audience all goes, oh, good. Somebody who knows what they're doing. I'm looking forward to this. Obviously confident. It just sets up a good relationship and people will smile back. So BESS is very good for calming the nerves and getting you into exactly the right place before you open your mouth and start speaking. After that, it's down to PPD. It's practice and prepare, and then deliver the thing that you've practiced and you've prepared. Shouldn't be difficult because you've prepared it so well.
That is so helpful, Julian. And I can imagine even just having kind of a game plan for when that moment comes. Like you said, when the nerves come, it's not a sign that anything's wrong. It actually is a sign that things are right, and that's going to help you be more alert. So, Julian, this has been so helpful for me as someone who wants to become a better communicator, a better speaker, a better leader. As a result of that, I want to be better with my family, with my wife, all those things. So thank you so much for taking the time today to invest in the leaders of this podcast. You've got a great book out, award-winning book, How to Be Heard, Secrets for Powerful Speaking and Listening. I know you have a wonderful website. It looks like with maybe some online courses as well, if people are interested in learning more, going deeper. Julian, anything else you'd like to share for people to be able to follow you or connect with you? Just really appreciate you coming on today.
Well, thanks again for the kind words, Cal. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I hope that, dear listener, you got something out of this you can take away with you. I do have workshops now that I've worked on, and I do those virtually, which has been really exciting as a development for me. I've just finished one today, actually, a 4-session workshop on listening skills. So that's something I can do for teams of anything from 4 to 20 people. And it's a very powerful way of moving those people through some of these realizations with exercises, which is it's a lot of fun. Gets it into the muscle memory. So yes, all of those things. Please do pop by the website. And these skills are so important. Never has the world needed listening more than it does now. And powerful speaking is irreplaceable. And as you rightly said, Callan, it's at home as well as at work. What's the biggest complaint in relationships? Yeah. He or she never listens to me. So our listening and our speaking, they underpin, as I said at the beginning, our happiness, our effectiveness, and our well-being. All three of those things, very powerful in affecting those and our outcomes in life. So I wish everyone listening to this happy listening and powerful speaking.
Well, thank you, Julian, for your generous time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, friend, thanks so much for sticking around to the end. Julian was such a gracious guest. I could listen to him talk all day. If you're watching on YouTube, let me know in the comments what resonated the most with you from this conversation. Also, a big thank you to all of you that have rated this show on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Each time you do that, it helps me bring on compelling guests like Julian Treasure. I hope this conversation encouraged you to keep on growing, because when the leader improves, lives improve. I hope you go and have a wonderful week. I love you. I appreciate you. Remember that life is short. Let's go make it count.